You have watched them move through the world untouched, unshaken. Observed how the smallest provocations, the slights, the whispers, the invisible jabs of envy, slide off their presence without leaving a mark. And yet, you wonder how? How does one become untouchable when the world is built to wound, to dominate, to exploit weakness? The truth is far simpler and far darker than any answer you have been told. Power, real power, begins in silence. Not in the noise of action, not in the clamor of recognition. It begins in the architecture of the mind. Most people are trapped in a theater of reactions. Every insult, every slight, every success of another triggers a chemical storm. Ego flares, fear contracts, desire claws. They act impulsively as though life itself were a mirror reflecting back their self-importance. But the untouchable, they do not. They are not mirrors. They are the architects of observation. While others lash, they catalogue. While others speak, they calculate. Every interaction becomes a map, every glance a measure of leverage, every pause a moment of psychological calibration. Consider the nature of the mind you are trying to penetrate. It is not chaotic. It is a disciplined field, organized around absence. Absence of reaction, absence of need, absence of the temptation to justify, explain, or defend. To the untrained observer, this absence appears as calm, perhaps arrogance, perhaps indifference. But it is not. It is strategy. It is the conscious excavation of self-mastery, the deliberate removal of your weaknesses from view. Ego, in others, is a weapon against themselves. It announces vulnerability, it telegraphs desire, it signals attachment. The untouchable sees ego as a pattern, predictable and exploitable. They measure it, they map it, and they wait. Because the true edge of power is not in striking first, it is in waiting for the fracture to appear, in knowing precisely where the line will give. And yet, there is something more insidious at play. It is not enough to be silent, to be detached. One must also cultivate invisibility within perception itself. To be untouchable, one must operate outside expectation, outside the scripts others live by. People will speak, they will judge, they will assign meaning to actions they do not comprehend. And in that misinterpretation lies opportunity. Because those who misperceive you cannot harm you. Their weapons fall into the void before they even reach the target. But here is the destabilizing truth: no untouchable is born. They are forged. Through isolation, through discipline, through the deliberate confrontation of every subtle fear that tempts the mind to react. They endure the quiet horror of their own potential. They face betrayal, humiliation, and disrespect, not with anger, but with analysis. Each wound becomes data. Each slight becomes a step in the calculation of dominance. And this is where the world begins to bend around them. Because when you move without need, when you act without ego, when your silence is precise, your absence deliberate, you do not just resist attacks, you make them irrelevant. You become a gravity well, drawing the chaos of others toward predictable orbits. You are untouchable, not because you are stronger, faster, or smarter in conventional terms, but because you have learned the secret map of human weakness, and you walk its corridors with calm authority. Now pause. Consider the walls of perception that surround you, the ego-driven impulses that betray you. They are your battlefield, and the untouchable, though invisible, knows how to turn this battlefield to their advantage. Soon, you will see the first layer of that advantage, the strategic manipulation of control, the subtle mastery of influence that keeps them untouchable even when others believe they dominate. Control is rarely obvious. It does not shout. It does not demand compliance. It seeps into every interaction, unnoticed, like water carving stone over decades. The untouchable understands this instinctively. They do not try to dominate people outright. They shape the currents that carry them. You may think influence is about persuasion, about force. You are wrong. Influence is perception, and perception is a fragile construct easily fractured by absence, by timing, by the subtle pressure of suggestion. Watch how they operate. A pause here, a silence there, a glance that lingers just long enough to unsettle. Every movement is calculated, every restraint deliberate. They give just enough information to satisfy curiosity, but never enough to create certainty. Certainty is the enemy of leverage. People crave it, but it is a cage. The untouchable offers ambiguity instead, and in that ambiguity they store power. Ego becomes the weapon they wield against the world. Others overcommit to appearances. They speak, they act, they assert, and in doing so, they betray the fragile patterns that govern their desire. The untouchable watches, cataloging each misstep. A misjudged word, a reaction too sharp, a hesitation too long, each reveals the boundaries of influence, the weak points where minds can be nudged, guided, and controlled without the slightest overt pressure. Yet control is not just external, it is internal. To command others, one must first command the self. Fear, impatience, the urgent need to react, all are surrendered to the calculated cadence of observation. Without this surrender, no strategy can hold. Emotional turbulence becomes visibility, and visibility invites attack. By mastering their own impulses, the untouchable maintains an ever-present calm, a quiet that is both disorienting and disarming. There is also the invisible economy of expectation. People project, assume, anticipate, and the untouchable harvests these projections. By allowing others to fill in the gaps, to act according to assumptions, they convert predictability into leverage. The less they reveal, the more others reveal themselves. And in that revelation lies opportunity. But beware, this level of control is fragile. It exists on the razor's edge of perception. Too much opacity and suspicion breeds. Too much exposure and leverage dissipates. Mastery demands balance, the constant adjustment of presence, the subtle manipulation of attention. It is a dance invisible to the untrained eye, and yet all-encompassing in its power. Soon, you will see how this external and internal control feeds into the next layer, the shaping of identity itself. How the untouchable not only manipulates others, but fractures the perception of self in a way that ensures compliance without confrontation. They are not merely untouchable, they are architects of reality, bending both the world and the minds within it to the rhythms of their silent authority. Perception is fragile. It is a glass dome, easily cracked, easily warped. Most people live under the illusion that the world they see is the world that exists. The untouchable knows this is a lie. Reality is not fixed, it is interpreted. And those who control interpretation control the consequences. They do not act to be seen, they act to be misunderstood. Every word, every gesture, every absence is a vector, a signal meant to be interpreted, misinterpreted, and misaligned with expectation. Others project their assumptions, their fears, their ambitions, and in that projection, they reveal themselves. The untouchable collects these revelations like currency, storing them for precise application. Notice the subtlety, they rarely speak directly. When they do, their words are minimal but charged, calculated to puncture certainty and leave doubt seeping into minds like ink in water. People will seek meaning where there is none, will scramble to impose narrative on randomness. And that scramble is power, because while they chase illusions, the untouchable moves unimpeded, unseen, untouchable. Identity itself becomes a tool. They shape the perception of who they are without ever defining it completely. To the observer, they are enigmatic, impossible to categorize, a contradiction in motion. This ambiguity generates discomfort, and discomfort is a leash. People bend themselves to comprehend, to anticipate, to align. And in that alignment, control is silently established. Yet there is danger in this veil. Misalignment can turn inward, fracturing one's own sense of self if untrained. The untouchable is meticulous, maintaining a rigid internal architecture, even as they distort the architecture of the world. They inhabit the boundary between presence and absence, between engagement and withdrawal. They are visible yet untouchable, present yet absent, real yet unknowable. Perception, then, is both shield and weapon. It deflects attack while generating leverage. Every misjudged glance, every misread intention, every assumption cast by others becomes a vector in their strategic design. To bend perception is to bend reality itself, and this is the realm where most fail, blinded by the need to be understood, to justify, to react. Now, you begin to see the danger of underestimation. Those who seem calm, distant, untouchable, they are not passive. They are engineers of influence, sculptors of chaos, and manipulators of human thought at the level most never perceive. The next layer will expose how obsession, both theirs and others, is weaponized into silent dominance. Obsession is a predator. It gnaws at reason, erodes patience, and blinds the mind. Most people fear it in themselves, fearing loss of control. The untouchable, they cultivate it in others. They do not force attention, they summon it. They do not demand loyalty, they extract it through the subtle architecture of desire, fear, and uncertainty. And when obsession blooms, it becomes invisible chains, binding others without confrontation, without awareness. Watch how it unfolds. A withheld answer here, a deliberate contradiction there. Small inconsistencies, carefully placed, create a need in the other to resolve, to chase, to understand. They will replay moments in their minds, passing every gesture, every word, every silence. Their focus narrows, their judgment skews. And in that skewed perception, the untouchable operates freely, unnoticed, untouchable. But obsession is not only external, it is internal. To sustain dominance, the untouchable must master the pull of their own fixation, the lure of compulsion, the quiet temptation to react. Without this self-discipline, obsession devours the mind instead of bending the minds of others. They maintain a precise distance from desire, watching it unfold as a scientist observes a living experiment, never stepping too close, never tipping the balance. In this layer, the lines between influence and identity begin to blur. Those ensnared by obsession reveal more than they intend. Their weaknesses, their habits, the rhythm of their fears, all are data points in a map invisible to everyone but the one who does not yield. And the untouchable reads this map with surgical precision. Each reaction becomes predictable, each impulse measurable, each attachment exploitable. There is also a terror here, subtle and unspoken. People fear losing control, yet in their obsession they surrender it willingly, never realizing that the untouchable has not taken anything, they merely guided it. Power is not theft, it is the orchestration of inevitability. Obsession is the quiet river into which others drift, thinking they swim freely, while the current carries them exactly where the untouchable intends. And now, as obsession sharpens, the next stage emerges: the fracture of identity itself. When the mind bends under anticipation, under misperception, under subtle manipulation, it begins to divide, to question its own reality. The untouchable does not merely control actions, they destabilize certainty, the core of every human mind. Identity is fragile. The self is a fragile construct, held together by memory, narrative, and the approval of others. Most people never realize how easily it can be chipped away, reshaped, and destabilized. The untouchable understands this. They do not assault the mind directly. They do not force confrontation. They introduce subtle fractures, tiny inconsistencies, whispered doubts, unspoken expectations, and let the mind erode itself from within. Observe closely. A compliment delivered with ambiguity. A slight contradiction in action. A withheld word at the critical moment. The mind reaches for coherence and fails. It hunts for patterns, seeks validation, and in that search, it exposes itself. The untouchable watches quietly, calculating, patient. Each fracture is a new lever of control, each hesitation a thread to be pulled at the perfect time. The genius of this stage lies in invisibility. Those fractured are unaware of their own division. They question themselves, their motives, their perception of reality. And as they falter internally, the untouchable moves externally without resistance, untouched by complaint, suspicion, or retaliation. Silence is the tool, ambiguity the hammer. The fracture deepens, unnoticed, unstoppable. Yet this is not cruelty for its own sake. It is strategic. The untouchable recognizes that identity is a battlefield. Weakness, attachment, ego. These are not just personal flaws, they are weapons the world wields against you. By fracturing perception, they preempt external attack. The mind, unsure of itself, cannot project resistance. Doubt becomes a shield, uncertainty a moat. There is an elegance here, cold and precise. The untouchable does not impose dominance, they invite the mind to betray itself. Others fight shadows of themselves while the untouchable navigates the real world, invisible, unbroken, untouchable. And as identity bends, the final layer of mastery emerges. The internal dominion that transcends manipulation, the sovereign calm of the untouchable mind. The next stage reveals the uncomfortable truth: power is not found in the world outside, but in the architecture of your own mind. Only then does untouchability become complete, unshakable, eternal. True power is never about others. It is a quiet, impenetrable fortress built within the mind. The untouchable understands this with ruthless clarity. Control of self precedes control of circumstance. Mastery of emotion precedes mastery of influence. Detachment precedes dominance. Until this internal architecture is secure, the world remains a storm capable of undoing even the most calculated strategies. Consider the untouchable's calm. It is not absence of feeling. It is absence of vulnerability to feeling. Anger, envy, fear, these exist, but they are measured, contained, and transformed into insight. No provocation penetrates. No insult disturbs. The mind does not react, it observes. Each impulse, each intention, each pattern is catalogued, analyzed, stored. Silence becomes armor, restraint becomes weapon. Every human action becomes a predictable variable in a system the untouchable controls entirely. Internal sovereignty demands sacrifice. Impulses are sacrificed. Comfort is sacrificed. The seductive need to be understood is sacrificed. All are replaced by an architecture of reason, patience, and strategic detachment. From this vantage, the untouchable sees the world in layers: ego, desire, fear, weakness, all manipulable, all irrelevant to their own stability. They are a silent apex, untouchable not because others fail, but because they have eliminated the possibility of being shaken. And here lies the subtle terror. The untouchable's power is not granted by circumstances, by force, or by recognition. It is self-generated. It is internal. It is invisible to observers who measure influence by noise, aggression, or visibility. Yet it is absolute. Others may attack, betray, or scheme, but their actions ripple harmlessly against a mind that has mastered its own shadows. Still, internal sovereignty is not perfection. It is vigilance. Every calm moment is a test. Every challenge an opportunity to reinforce boundaries, to refine control. The untouchable does not merely endure the chaos of the world, they orchestrate their response before chaos appears. Their untouchability is a function of preparation, observation, and unflinching self-mastery. The final stage is near. Once internal sovereignty is achieved, the last revelation emerges, a truth so quiet, so haunting, that it redefines the very nature of power itself. What follows is not strategy, manipulation, or control. It is understanding. Understanding that the world is irrelevant, the mind is absolute. The world is not what it seems. Power is not the loud claim of conquest, nor the visible imprint of influence. It is quiet, it is internal. And those who seem untouchable are untouchable because they understand the most unsettling truth: the external world is irrelevant. What matters is the architecture of the mind, the dominion over one's own perception, the sovereign silence that no force can breach. Most spend their lives reacting, chasing validation, defending ego, submitting to fear. They mistake motion for control, noise for power. The untouchable watches not with cruelty, but with precision. Every human failing becomes a mirror of their own mastery. Every insult, betrayal, and challenge is absorbed and measured, never wasted, never relinquished. They are untouchable because they cannot be unsettled. They are sovereign because the chaos that others cannot reach inside. Consider the psychological hierarchy. Strength, intelligence, wealth, they are superficial. True sovereignty exists in emotional independence, in the calm that follows clarity, in the ability to act without attachment to outcome. This is why the untouchable is feared, even when invisible. They are not bound by reciprocity, by expectation, by the fragile constructs others rely upon to navigate reality. Their presence or absence shapes events because their internal gravity is absolute. And here is the final, haunting edge. Those who seek to harm the untouchable are unwitting participants in their own exposure. Every effort to destabilize is absorbed, catalogued, and transformed into leverage. They cannot touch the untouchable because the untouchable has removed the very target they seek. Presence is controlled. Ego is mastered. Reaction is eliminated. The untouchable is untouchable not by superiority, but by sovereignty. In the end, the uncomfortable truth is this: the only battlefield that matters is the one within. The only enemy that can threaten you is the one you allow to exist inside your mind. To be untouchable is not to dominate others, it is to dominate yourself. To be untouchable is to move through the world untouched, because you have built a fortress no insult can breach, no fear can infiltrate, no betrayal can penetrate. And in that silence, in that sovereign stillness, the world becomes irrelevant. You are untouchable, not because they fear you, but because you have claimed a territory no one else can enter, the unassailable mind.